We don't want money to be given to us only or borrowed to us only. We have some of our own money. It's just not enough. We're fiercely independent. We're determined also to borrow if need be, but we'll borrow responsibly. We never borrow recklessly.
How much money do you need for that?
Well, I can't put a figure on it immediately.
This is the journey to one Africa.
Let's say Masisi, the president of Botswana. Thank you very much, Mr. President.
Thank you.
You're here in Paris to attend the summit meant to ramp up vaccine manufacturing production on African soil. Obviously, here in the West, many people think about COVID when they think about vaccines, but obviously in Africa, malaria is a much bigger plague. Do you see this production ramp up as key to taking care of Africans, especially African children?
Thank you very much for the interview. And I am here indeed in Paris to engage with a view to getting help in our intention to be able to independently produce vaccines of a variety of types. Clearly, the last pandemic we suffered was COVID, and we had the means to procure. We didn't get the vaccines. And that was really sore. That's why we are so resolute in making sure that we can produce our own. But you're right, we have a number of neglected tropical diseases. And so those we would also focus on and produce those. But we're also committed to the One Health principle. We currently are able to produce, thanks to French technology and help, foot and mouth vaccine for cattle. And so we want to optimize and borrow from the skills sets that we developed in the production of vaccine for cattle and bring it to vaccines for human.
Right. For this, you need money.
We need money.
How much money, and how much money are you hoping to get from rich countries that might have their economic issues or other priorities like the war in Ukraine, and et cetera, et cetera?
We need the money that it takes to produce vaccines that are safe. We don't want money to be given to us only or borrowed to us only. We have some of our own money. It's just not enough. We're fiercely independent. We're determined also to borrow if need be, but we'll borrow responsibly. We never borrow recklessly.
How much money do you need for that?
Well, I can't put a figure on it immediately, but yes, it billions. I mean, the pharmaceutical industry, if you're developing it from near scratch like we are, it's going to cost a lot of money, but it's necessary money to spend.
Right. Alongside the presidents of Angola and Namibia, you wrote a letter to the G7 leaders to complain that this group, the G7, had decided, as part of its sanctions against Russia, that all diamonds sold in G7 countries need to go through Antwerp in Belgium and not other places. Why did you write this letter?
We were offended by the decision. We were offended by the decision because...
It's a wrong decision?
It's a wrong decision because it didn't take our views into account.
They didn't ask you anything?
It's a wrong decision because it was compromising our sovereignty as independent nation states. It's a wrong decision because it was taking away our capacity to be in control even of our data to do with diamonds. It's a wrong decision because we are the producer countries. Why would we not be trusted? Why would we not be given the opportunity, if there was any doubt, to be a node and place it in a country that does not produce diamonds?
But as one of the top diamond producers in the world, I mean, they must have asked you before, no?
No, they didn't.
Really?
That's why we were offended. We did say that to them. Then they came to talk to us. But they talked to us when the plan was pretty rolled forward with many, many errors in it. And so we have kept on engaging. And as we engaged deeper and further, the teams that are sent to us, when they got stuck, diverted to saying that they were only messengers. So we wrote the letter to try and talk to the political
Did you get an
leaders.
answer to that letter?
We are waiting for an answer.
And if you don't get an answer?
We will get an answer.
So you're hoping that they're going to change that decision, allow other centers to process diamond?
Precisely.
If not, what would you do?
I don't think there's any other way.
Right,
So
but if they say no, that's because we want tight sanctions against Russia.
I don't want to
Would you do an embargo? Would you? I mean, are you ready to?
No. I don't want to go that route. I'm convinced in the conversations we've had that there's positivity at the end of the tunnel.
Speaking of diamonds, you are supposed to finalize a new diamond sales agreement with De Beers at the end of June. First of all, will this happen in time? And what will this change from previous sales agreements? Some commentators have said that they were unbalanced.
We are about 98, close to 99% done with the deal. So very few things remain.
The last mile is often the most difficult one.
The last mile. And so, the broader issues we've agreed on. Whether it'll be signed in June or July, I'm not a technical expert in that area, but I just know that it'll be signed. There is a huge difference between the previous deal and the new one. Massive difference, night and day. In the previous agreement, for instance, that master agreement we had with De Beers, the original one resulted in them taking away to sell 100% of all diamonds. Then 2011, when we renegotiated the deal, 10% was taken by the Botswana government of the production of Botswana, which is a joint company between De Beers and the Botswana government, so that we could discover price. But without getting into details, we really didn't discover price so much. There were a number of limiting factors. And so when we renegotiated this time, not only did we agree on a principle of negotiation, which resulted in about 6 months, an increase from 10% to 25%, which is what we get now, but we're committed and we've agreed, once we sign the deal at signature, we will now take an allocation of 30%. And then we'll ramp up every year until on the 10th year, we're taking 50% of production.
Are you saying?
That's one.
Okay.
The bigger change is also that we have removed the non-compete clause. That was the most offending clause in the old agreement.
So you can sell to others.
We can sell to others, we can beneficiate, we can participate in the whole pipeline.
Was it a colonial era type of agreement before?
You bet. It was more than colonial.
What was it?
Obnoxious, neo-colonial, imperial, and close to racist.
Your country is often hailed as an example of wildlife conservation. Several Western countries are pushing for a ban on the import of hunting trophies, as they're known. This is not something that makes you happy. You even said, in jest maybe, recently to Germany that, well, you're ready to send them 20,000 elephants. You have the largest elephant population in the world, 130,000, I believe. Why are you upset by this effort by the West to avoid too much hunting, especially those kinds of animals?
Yet again, we would like more respect. Similar to the G7 decision, in this case, the reasons advanced are negated by evidence and science for the ban.
The reasons being to preserve nature and so on, right?
Precisely, because you don't do that by banning. Just like with any factory, because the nature of reproduction of elephants is similar to a production line that you have of VW or Peugeot. You've got offtake. If you don't, there's glut. If there's glut with living species, big mammalian species like elephants, what happens to the very ecosystem you're trying to protect? But more than anything else, if you're really a humane person, what happens to the human beings who live there? Particularly in a country like mine, where we've preserved more than 40% of land for conservation. There's nobody who has that record. So what do you think happens to those elephants? What do you think happens to the people who live there? What happens do you think happens to their livelihoods when they try and eke out a living growing crops? Now, that is fallacious logic. Worse still is the non-recognition of the policies in place, the very progressive conservation policies we have, wherein the resources acquired out of the marketing from hunting is used for conservation on the main, is used for development, to protect the very species, to improve the livelihoods of the rural communities who live around these magnificent species.
So what you're replying to the West is that in order to preserve crops, to preserve even lives in your country, you have to be able to hunt elephants.
You've got to be able to hunt elephants, among other things.
Right.
It's not a panacea.
Right.
It's not a silver bullet, but it certainly does help, because elephants are very intelligent. You know, you shoot in a particular area, they avoid that area.
Right. But do you think that Europeans prefer elephants to people in Botswana?
Yes, certainly, they're behaving like they do. Those Europeans who want to use the reasoning that they do to prevent fair trade of products in the wildlife economy.
So what are you going to do if there are such bans
We're going to
imposed?
talk to the Europeans. We've always
But if they don't listen?
They're human beings, they're governments, we have diplomatic relations, we will talk until they listen, because there are many ways of talking.
I want to ask you more generally about democracy in Africa. In West Africa especially, I know it's far from your country, but nevertheless, we've seen coups. In other countries, we're seeing debates about presidential terms, people saying, oh, you know, I'm going to change the constitution, be able to have a new mandate, and so on. Are you concerned about the fate of democracy on the continent?
I'm not only concerned about the fate of democracy on the continent, I'm concerned about the fate of democracy globally. Okay. And in some of the leading democracies, I'm even more concerned, because they have been the examples that we've been following.
For instance?
Well, I don't know if I should be naming countries, but if you see what's happening in some leading industrialized countries about issues of democratic slide back, it's very worrying.
And do you think that as a result, African leaders are taking a page from them?
Well, if you do look at somebody or some institution, country, person, what you have as an inspiration, as some example, they tend to be big influences.
You're confident you're going to win those elections?
I am, based on the reaction I'm getting from people. But you know, democracy and elections are never certain. So my confidence is not the fact that I will win. The fact is I'm confident. That's where the fact ends.
On those words, I want to thank you very much, President Masisi, for appearing here on France 24, and thank you all for watching this show.